with the Antichrist, which last week we looked at the New Covenant and many of the things that go into it. Tonight's lesson, I was going to contain several different scriptures, but really it's all keyed out of that 9th chapter, the book of Daniel, particularly that 27th verse, but really beginning there at 24, Daniel 9, where it says that 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, upon your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks the street shall be built again, the wall even in troublous times. After 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, not for himself. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city, the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be at the flood, and unto the end of the war desolation to return. He will confirm the covenant of many for 1 week. In the midst of the week he will cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Of the overspreading of abominations he will make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined it shall be poured upon the desolate. This is, of course, that whole 70 weeks prophecy deals, of course, with Israel's timeline. You know, Daniel in many ways is a book about timelines. You know, you've got the timeline of world history, basically, which is a world power from Daniel's day all the way up till the present era as well. But he also gave time to explain Israel's time frame as well. We'll get into that a little bit more detail in the parts, but this covenant is between Israel and the Antichrist. It's Daniel's 70th week, that last week, in that prophecy that I read there from Daniel. All the prior weeks have been fulfilled. Now we're sitting here in the interval between the next to last and the last week. Will be made as this compact will be made as the Antichrist seeks to consolidate his power over the nations during the end times. This period of time covered, including this covenant, is what is frequently designated as the tribulation period, which will mark the conclusion of this dispensation. And we're going to know the development of this study. The covenant of Israel and Antichrist will be established when the parties of this compact officially agree to a 7-year treaty. It is certainly ironic of all the compacts considered in this series, this is the only one not offered by God. As you think about the 70th week of Daniel, this time frame of this covenant, it is 7 years, obviously. It's known, it's designated by many different titles. If you look into the Old Testament, you're going to find a bunch of titles for it. It's a part of the day of the Lord. It's not the full day of the Lord. The day of the Lord actually covers from since the beginning of tribulation all the way to the end of millennium, depending upon which particular passage you're looking at and what aspect you're talking about. It's called the day of Jacob's trouble, the day of God's wrath. It's many different things that go into it. All those titles, of course, simply highlight, they emphasize different aspects of this same time frame. There's a lot of things that are brought to conclusion in the 7 years and in that time frame there. And so sometimes you call it Jacob's trouble because they're emphasizing the fact that dealing with Jacob, the nation of Israel. You know, it's the day of the Lord's wrath, because it's God's wrath not only upon Israel, but also upon really the entire world as he brings about the judgment for sin. But it's all that 7-year time frame there, which I can talk a little bit about that Wednesday night in Revelation. But it is the only one that's made in the study anyway between Israel and other than God. One of the interesting things about that is that when you look at it, the new covenant was basically brought into effect, we looked at last week, with the death of Christ. It's obviously not in full go now because Israel didn't accept Christ, but really that's the covenant that Israel is under. And so any covenant they make now is not going to be, isn't a true covenant because they're already under a covenant. They just not fully accepted it. And this covenant, as you can imagine, that doesn't work out that way. This covenant was built upon false promises and false premise, and it didn't go nearly as well as the Jews would have hoped, and or really in the end as anybody would have hoped. But it was a covenant nonetheless, and it did determine Israel's condition for a 7-year time frame there. Just sadly, the last 3.5 years, that 7-year period, was not what they were promised by the Antichrist anyway. According to Daniel 9:27, the parties to this covenant will be the nation of Israel and Antichrist. That's those verses in where it says that he, that is the prince that will come, will confirm the covenant of many for 1 week. And so that's your two parties. You've got the prince, the Antichrist. Again, just like the tribulation period, the Antichrist is given a lot of different titles or names. He's the Antichrist, he's the little horn, he's the beast, there's all kinds of different titles, but just like with everything else, all those titles highlight different aspects of his personality, of his work as the Antichrist. I mentioned a little bit, but that 9:24 to 27 has outlined the history of the Jewish people from the time they returned to their homeland from Babylon, exile, the coming of the Messiah, and the power of the Lord. Proposed by the Antichrist, the pronoun he appears in 3 instances in Daniel 9:27. In each case, the reference is to the prince that will come, mentioned in verse 26. This treaty, this covenant, is going to be proposed. It will be brought to attention by the Antichrist himself. And so that's where this is all going to begin. He is the coming prince. And Daniel identified the people of the coming prince as those who destroy the city of Jerusalem and then the temple. 9:26 talk about how he said that and the people of the prince that will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof will be with the flood. And so it's the same people, which of course Jerusalem was destroyed by Titus, the Roman army, there in AD 70. 100,000 Jews were killed, thousands more were scattered, and it's obvious therefore that the leader to whom the prophet referred will be associated in some manner with the Romans. Previously, Daniel interpreted a dream by Nebuchadnezzar, which the Babylonian Empire seen him as an image of a man. This gets into what I said was the outline of Western civilization, which is really what it is. He had 5 materials. This image of this man is composed of 5 materials that represent the 5 powerful empires which would rise to power successively, but not necessarily in an immediate succession. You had the rise of, obviously, Babylon, conquered Syria, and then Babylons that fell to the Media and the Persians, and eventually it was just the Persian, because that two-sided barrier, eventually the Persians basically took power, and then you had the Grecian Empire, that eventually would succeed to the Roman Empire. And so the gold head symbolized Babylon, silver breast arms described the Medo-Persians, and then of course the Grecian was the thighs, and the Roman Empire was represented by the iron legs and the feet and toes of iron. Extension of an empire, by a separate entity, nonetheless, indicated by additional element, noted an empire yet to come to power. So evidently some form of a revived Roman Empire, down 241 through 43. This is where you kind of get into a little bit of the speculation side of things. It's going to be some form of revised Roman Empire, but there are, as it stands presently, there's several different ways that could, in theory, come to pass. And I don't plan on being here when the Antichrist is in power, so I may not get to see how that all comes to pass, but it will be some form of a revised Roman Empire. Technically speaking, the Roman government ceded their power to the Pope, and so technically, as long as there's a Pope, there's a Roman Empire, because the authority of Rome resides with the Pope. Now, how exactly that's going to all play into things in the end, I don't know. The Roman Church doesn't have the power today that they once did. However, given the amount of people who are Roman Catholic, you could easily see how, with the right criteria met, they could come to power again. Keep in mind, when the church is raptured and all of us are gone, you're going to be left behind. And so, in many ways, the Roman Catholic Church might become that voyage of region again. Or, it's going to be some form of alliances. And also, it should be noted that many of your Eastern countries are still predominantly Catholic. And so, if you can find a league of nations that are European, you're probably going to have most of them going to be Catholic in some way or another. And so, there's any number of scenarios, logical scenarios, the way I see it anyway, where you can see all these elements playing together to bring about a revival of the empire. To me, you can kind of pick which one you think is most plausible to go with. I think when the time comes, you're not going to have a doubt which one it's going to be. Right now, we're still far enough away that we can only see different ways it can happen. But I will say this, it is very interesting, though, when you consider the fact of how many possibilities that there are. Because, there was a day where a lot of this stuff that you talk about in this Daniel Standard Week, a lot of this, there was no feasible way. There was a day when you were talking about making a treaty with Israel, and you were going to sit by a preacher and say, well, one day Israel's going to come back to their land, they're going to be a nation again, don't know when, don't know how, and then they're going to form all these treaties. But what? Israel's a nation today. There was a day people would have said, well, it's the Roman Catholic Church, and they just had to take guesses as to what powers would do this or that. The fact that we can see so many clear options, to me, is a clear indicator that we are indeed ever drawing near to when all these things are going to come into fruition and come to pass. And we should be aware of that. We may not be here during the 7-year time frame, but many of these things are going to happen, are already going to be set in place before it actually occurs. And I think we can already see many ways in which they're beginning to come into play, come into pass.
You see, the Roman Catholic Church now, how the world's all turning toward homosexuality and everything else. They've accepted it now.
Yeah.
You can see how your Islamic nations they still don't accept it. Now whether they do later on, I don't know. But you can see where the Pope now has always said, it's okay to be a queer, homosexual, lesbian.
Yeah.
That's all okay. So you've got the way the face of the world's turning that way. You can see where the Roman Catholic Church is going to pull them in,
Yeah.
Just like the Democratic Party has pulled them in, to help them take over. So you can see where the Roman Catholic Church can come back to power quick.
Oh yeah.
Once the church is taken out.
And if history has showed us anything, it's that you could never underestimate the power of the Pope and the papacy to do anything.
Yeah.
It ought to terrify you down in history, and you realize how quickly militant that they can become. And again, during the 7 years, the church is gone, so the voice of God will probably be, mainly your Catholic Church, your Pope, and maybe a few of the other fringe groups, but really, about the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, well, they're really not that big of a majority, especially not worldwide. And you talk about the Catholic Church, you've got an actual well-established worldwide entity. And for the Muslims, you never really quite know what's going to happen with that one. Because in many ways, you even see how the Pope at times has tried to be friendly towards them. So you can even see how that you kind of blend that into some form of viable treaty, especially when you consider the fact that the Muslims are taught in their book that they're allowed to, to fake peace if it helps further jihad. So you can see how that, they say, we'll make peace. Yeah, it'll all be fine. Well, I will be at peace with you for a little while, only to be silently building up their armies, which you kind of can see that picture later on in the tribulation as well. And so,
well, they're already doing that now.
Yeah.
They'll make. Well, with us, they made peace. They're not going to do anything about the atomic bomb all the time. They're over there, building it, getting it ready.
And technically, they're even told that they can denounce Allah if they only will denounce it in their heart if it helps further jihad. And so that's why at times you really can't trust the devout Muslims, because their entire Quran is devoted to making sure, hey, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you get to the cause further. And so,
as long as you kill somebody.
Yeah, as long as you get, as long as you further jihad. So you really got to be careful. And so it's frighteningly interesting at times, the times that we live in, and how easily some of these things can come to be. That's why, like I said, there are so many possibilities that I'm not even going to try and tell you which one I think it is. I don't know. I just like looking at all the possibilities and saying, you know what? There's no doubt that we are truly drawing near. And you look at all the global catastrophes and rumors of war, everybody wanting peace somehow or another. Yep.
As long as it's their way.
As long as it's their way. That's the kicker right there. Coming prince, and you got the end time ruler. The substance of Nebuchadnezzar's vision appeared to Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar saw this giant statue, and Daniel, of course, saw the beast that came out. Daniel's empire, he saw Babylon rulers as well as he had an extension. In Daniel's case, however, he saw 10 horns as opposed to the 10 toes. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, with the horns being part of, but still an adjunct from the fourth beast. John saw the same subject matter, Revelation 13. With a further insight of the composite beast he beheld represented a powerful ruler who will oppose God and his people and will wield power over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. This end-time ruler, which was seen by by both Daniel and the Apostle John, is the Antichrist, mentioned in 1 John 2:18. The man of sin, the son of perdition, described in 2 Thessalonians 2. The wicked one, the beast out of the sea, depicted in Revelation. The little horn, Daniel 7:8, 8:9. King of ferocious countenance, mentioned in 8:23. The prince that will come, depicted in Daniel 9:26. The willful king, foretold in Daniel 11:36. There is coming a ruler, a man who will come to power, who will obtain much power, and much of it under false premise of peace, which isn't really going to be peace, but he'll come to power. And again, you can see the way that our world is structured today with the way that we have all of our UNs and EUs and all the confederacies of nations. And for the right person with the right silver tongue could easily coerce these nations into peace. The nations hold that we as a nation have, I'd say, probably very little knowledge of what actually our country does and gets into in some of these confederacies. And so you can see how a few leaders here, and this one comes to power, and he talks to a few people, threatens a few others, and next thing you know, hey, look here, we've got peace, and I'm the ruler over everybody. So you can also see how then you'd have the feel of people who would say, wait a minute. And that's why he's got to go around and basically put down a few of the fires here and there, because some nations and some people are going to be going, no. But he'll quickly come to his power nonetheless. This treaty will be accepted by the Jewish people. Again, 927, he references the Midi, that is the nation of Israel. Many of the people will accept it. They'll get to enter into this 7-year treaty with the Antichrist. Go over the definition there. This is not going to be a secret covenant. It's going to be public. It's going to be something that everybody's going to know it. Matter of fact, it will probably be greatly applauded and greatly triumphed for a long time. It's going to be what's all going to be across your CNNs. Everybody is going to be ecstatic. Boy, look, we've done that. We've done about peace in the Middle East. Israel's done come to terms. They've accepted, and so it will be very public. The covenant between the Jews and Antichrist will not have an indefinite agreement and a duration. It will have specifically 7 years. Christ is going to come for a saints at a time when he least expected. It's highly reasonable that he will come prior to the establishment of the compact. That he will come prior to the establishment of the compact of the Antichrist and the Jewish people. Of course, we believe that. This realization should have a twofold effect on believers. First, it should comfort us to know we'll be removed from the world before commences the relation period. Additionally, this understanding should cause believers to serve God faithfully and as fervently as possible, because no one knows at what time Christ will come and receive his own unto himself. None of these things will be secret. They will be open. We just don't know exactly when. We will be taken out before this week is commenced or it comes into being. But as to how soon before that, that's a little more debatable, but probably not too soon before that. But nonetheless, we won't be here, but Israel will, and they're going to accept it. And it's going to be a great time, supposedly, in the beginning. And you start to see why as you get into some of the purposes of this covenant. The reason that this covenant is going to come to being, Israel and Antichrist, is not specifically stated in any one place in Scriptures. By considering the overall conditions of the time, when this compact will be established, one can see some likely reasons for the covenant. The Antichrist and national Israel both have pressing motivations for the agreement in this end-time matter. Undoubtedly, the Antichrist is seeking to solidify his position as the most powerful leader in the world. He extends control of the 10 nations that will constitute his empire. Almost likely he wants to calm the troublesome currents in the Middle East, since at least some nation in that region will be part of his domain. Oh, the Middle East will be critical. More strife in the Middle East would divert attention and resources Antichrist would otherwise use for other matters. It's essential for him to have assurance of as much stability as possible. That part of the world that has been so volatile for so many years. A pact for the Jews would be very helpful in soothing and settling issues that have been as yet unresolved between Israel and her neighbors. Obviously, the surrounding circumstances are a little bit uncertain. We know a lot of what goes into this treaty, per se, because obviously the Antichrist executed Israel, 7-year time frame, but obviously there will be other things we don't fully know as yet. The actual current political climate, global turmoil that's going to be going on there. I'm sure there will be many things. If it is, if the church is taken out first, and then this leads to this treaty, you could see the chaos that would cause. There's any number of things that could play into that, but the Antichrist is going to make this treaty to solidify his power, and eventually we'll find out that eventually it's also to us of authority and to be crowned as king. He wants not just political power, he wants all power. That's his ultimate goal and desire. For Israel, their purpose, first of all, will be to live in peace, and almost certainly it's going to tie into the rebuilding efforts for their temple in Jerusalem. There is no temple presently, and right now, of course, they are not living in peace. Modern-day Israel officially became a nation on May 14, 1948. From the very beginning of that national existence, they have been in unending hostility. In the first 15 years, Israel was involved in 3 wars, numerous skirmishes. Terrorist activities are almost consistent in Israel today. Desire for peace is so strong that recently Israel has relinquished some territory and wrestled from some of its neighbors in a land for peace effort. To be assured of 70 years of peace will be a powerful enticement for the Jews. Obviously, when you start looking into some of these things, you have to realize that, kind of like with the crucifixion, this is also the plan of God. And so God's hand will play this as well. But Israel wants peace. And, if things get bad enough, they might just be willing. They've actually shown to be willing at times to give a little if they can gain a lot. And so, they're going to want peace. You and I don't have any idea what it's like to be an Israelite, probably. In the modern day, you never know who's going to get bombed, where, what marketplace is going to get blown up, what consistent threats you have all around them, because people won't acknowledge that this is your land and you have the right to be there. But they're consistent threats. They're going to want that peace. And this treaty is going to, at least on the surface, promise that. And it's going to be a false peace. It's not going to last. But it's a promise of peace. In our political sphere today should prove anything to us. It's that the promises can carry great weight. You don't have to fulfill it. You ain't got to do what you say. But boy, if you make the right promises, you can get people to vote for anything. Do anything you want to. We see that in our country all the time today. The leaders, all you got to do is make your promises, and boy, people just go crazy for it. Well, they're going to promise this. Well, in fact, it makes no sense and it's not plausible in any way, shape, form, or fashion. But hey, they promised. We're going to vote for it. Probably someone like peace. Well, we want peace. We'll go for it. And of course, building the temple. It seems evident the Jews will be permitted to rebuild the temple. There has to be a temple because the Antichrist desecrates it in the midpoint. Okay, now, so at some point in time, relevant to this, they're going to be rebuilding the temple. And so they're going to move forward with the temple, and that will probably be tied into the efforts of this treaty. Whether that treaty begins the process or just gives them the peace to finish the process they've already started, it'll be something like that more than likely, where they will begin to actually put this into place, which we'll get into that a little bit later in this lesson about the rebuilding of the temple, about how they've already got a lot of that stuff in position. All Israel really needs is just the go-ahead. Once they get the go-ahead, that temple will be built pretty remarkably quick. And so that's what they are looking for. Israel wants a temple because by Jewish law, you don't got a temple, you can't really worship God. They can't do the sacrifice. that they need to do. And so they're ready for it. They want it. They desire that temple. Now, boy, if you can get a leader who can give them peace and temple, they'll more than likely jump at that. And there will be times for that as well. Provisions of this covenant, obviously we mentioned it will be a 7-year covenant. That's seen in Daniel 9:27 that we saw. The 7 years covered by this compact coincides exactly with the tribulation period of the end time, the last half of this period being the Great Tribulation. That will be the sum. That's why it will be 7 years, because that's what God has determined. Now, I don't know what crazy concoction of promises that they're going to throw in that for the Antichrist to say it's going to be 7 years, but all things because God determined 7 years. I'm sure there'll be some political logic as to why 7 years were determined, but nonetheless, God said you got 7 years, and that's what they're going to get. And that's what it will be. The provisions, obviously, we talked about purpose. They wanted peace, they're going to get peace. At least in the early going, at least in the face of things, some of the face value of things. The Antichrist will actually be accepted by many Jews as their Messiah, the one whom they have anticipated for so many centuries. Just one of the Jews would reject him even though he had come in his father's name, but yet will receive one who will come in his own name. The one who comes in his own name will be the Antichrist, who will shamelessly and blasphemously claim to be the true Christ and offer the Jews a false peace. The prophet Jeremiah warned the people of his day not to be deceived by those who claim to offer peace when there is no peace. Paul also spoke of the one of the plight of those who accepted the false peace. 1 Thessalonians 5:3, when they'll say peace and safety and sudden destruction comes upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. The Jews want a Messiah, and many of them are going to accept the Antichrist as that Messiah. That's what they're going to claim to be. And at varying points, a lot of the Jews are also going to realize this isn't right, and they're going to start to flee. They're going to flee to Petra. They're going to flee, and they're going to hide. They're going to seek safety because they realize he's not the Messiah. Especially once he reaches that midpoint and he desecrates the temple, then they're really going to realize, no, this isn't the Messiah. And then that's when also the Antichrist turns on them, and then true persecution and bloodshed really begins to occur. Much like what you see with Muhammad. Muhammad originally, he came trying to get the Jews to accept him, and then after they eventually rejected him over and over again, then eventually get to the point where it was, we'll kill him. That's the basic tenet of the Islamic faith when it comes to Jewish relations. In the beginning, they said, prefer the Christians and the Jews. And when the Christians and Jews wouldn't accept him as their leader, then he said, well, you know what, then kill them all, because they won't accept me. Kind of like with the Antichrist. So they'll start off with, well, you accept me and it'll be fine. And then eventually they won't, so it'll be, well, then you're always going to die. And persecution will ensue. However, never forget that for all the wanton death and destruction the Antichrist may bring, God's still in control, and God will eventually destroy him, defeat him as well. Another temple, the first temple erected by Solomon during his reign, which was, of course, destroyed and then rebuilt after they returned from the Babylonian exile. And of course, it was renovated, rebuilt, if you want to. It wasn't really truly rebuilt per se by here. It is more or less remodeled and built up, so to speak, by Herod. But it was destroyed in 87. As of right now, there is an Islamic mosque that sits on top of where the temple was supposed to have stood. And so even though the Jews technically possessed that land and all the temple area, they had never felt secure enough to raise and destroy the Dome of the Rock. Now, obviously, when it comes to rebuilding the temple, this is where it's quite possible some of your compromise comes into play. I know I've read and I've seen where there are some Jews who would state that, that the temple wasn't actually built where the Dome of the Rock was. It was built adjacent to it. And so, if that's the case, you could actually see, well, okay, you got the Dome of the Rock here, and you'll have the Jewish temple here beside it, which if that's the case, and you begin to understand why you have one world religion, because right there is your two major world religions, other than, of course, Christianity, which I'm sure they'll have a location somewhere in there, that's all centered in that one locality, in that one area. But whether they destroy the Dome of the Rock and build a temple right there, whether they build it adjacent to it, or whether they find some way to renovate the dome of the rock and rededicate it somehow or another. Well, either way, that's going to be a new temple that is put there. And it's going to involve somehow compromise and between the Jews and the Muslims somehow in order for it to work. How those compromises work out, just have to wait and see how all that plays out. But nonetheless, it's going to be rebuilt. And Israel is going to have their temple and their temple worship yet again. And of course, it is that temple that will ultimately lead to a breaking of that 7-year treaty, because the midpoint, that 3.5-year point, the Antichrist is going to go in and desecrate that temple and make it to where they are to worship Him. The temple has always been the place of worship for Israel, and has often been something that has been desecrated, defiled, and wronged by many of Israel's people and kings throughout the years. But nothing will meet like what was done, what will be done by the Antichrist, and so it will come to pass. The son of perdition, he will desecrate and defile the temple. He will set up the abomination of desolation, and the people will flee. The case when the Antichrist enter the temple and demands the sacrifices cease, they be acknowledged as God, because they will be when the temple is officially dedicated on the place of the edifice, the courtyard, and all the accessories and amenities. I don't know, that's speculation, but it will be desecrated by the Antichrist. Perpetuity of the covenant, obviously, it was established for 7 years. I looked at several times. It wouldn't last for 7 years, except Antichrist breaks it at the midpoint. And so this is actually one covenant that was made for a set time, 7 years, but was actually broken before it could come into completion. Technically, the other covenants, even with like the Mosaic covenant, God, yes, Israel broke it on occasion, but God always had provisions in there to restore them. There is no restoration. Once the Antichrist breaks it, there is no restoration of this covenant. Of course, the last half of that 7-year period will be that the great tribulation. God's wrath is truly metered out. We see that a great deal in the book of Revelation. So this Antichrist covenant that he makes with Israel is going to look good on the surface. It's going to be a time of jubilation and joy for the first little bit. And then the reality kind of settles in, and people realize that the peace isn't really peace, and the Antichrist isn't really the Christ, it's the Antichrist. Well, this covenant will be made, and it will signify, and it will signal that the end is truly coming soon. The last 7 years of Israel's appointed time before we go into that eternal ages. The Jews will be driven by their intense desire to live in peace and rebuild the temple, while the Antichrist will seek only strengthen his grip and become the most powerful leader in the world. The world power behind the Antichrist will be Satan himself, as indicated by the Antichrist demanding worship as God in the rebuilt temple. That abominable act will unleash all the Jewish people, the entire world as well, the terrible times known as great tribulation. And so that's the covenant Israel will make with the Antichrist. Not between Israel and God, but between man, Antichrist, and Israel. It will be for peace, it will be for temple worship, but they will only receive that on the surface. They'll never truly have that peace or that worship until Christ returns and defeats the Antichrist and his armies and establishes his kingdom there in the nation of Israel, there in Jerusalem. Any comments, questions, inputs, or anything about this particular covenant?
You can see, where 7-year peace treaty would be a whole lot easier to get than a lifetime peace treaty.
Oh, yeah.
Because they've tried that and they never worked. So we'll just make a little step. We'll try it for 7 years.
Yeah.
See how it goes. If we can live through the 7 years, then we'll extend the peace treaty.
Yep. And that one of the things that always stand out to me is how God told them specifically in the book of Daniel, right there, plain as day, they're going to be a 7-year treaty, and they signed the 7-year treaty, and all the Jews don't go, hey, boy, this sure sounds kind of reminiscent of something I read in the Bible somewhere, And for some of them, the light bulb will go on. But sadly, a lot of them won't. God told them specifically, just like with the crucifixion, with the coming of Christ, we'll be cut off for his people. All these nations given to Israel so at times spiritually blind to the truths that God puts in their word, we're much the same way, but they won't see it. But, that's like we as a church, when the Antichrist comes into power and signs that treaty, if we're here, we're going to know it. We would know, hey, we know what this is. The Bible clearly says it. It's part of the reason why we don't know when Christ is coming back. We'll be gone by that time. But nonetheless, it's 7 years.
Well, with what I've read about what's going on in Israel right now, most of them are atheists.
Yeah.
So you can understand why they don't know nothing about the tribulation period. They don't believe the Bible anyway. They don't read the Bible, don't study the Bible. To them, yeah, this sounds good, because they only believe God anyway.
Which is really interesting in some ways because there's this desire to rebuild the temple, but yet the Jewish religion as a whole is so fragmented that they're almost as bad off as the Catholics and the Protestants. You start looking at all the different sects and break-offs and your different versions of Judaism, even your atheistic Jews, but yet somehow they all desire a temple. Why does an atheistic Jew desire a temple?
Because we had one years ago.
Yeah,
we had one back Old Testament times.
Yeah, doesn't have to make sense, I guess. But, hey, we always had one, so ain't one out. That's what it is. You don't have to agree on everything, but boy, why don't we get temple? We'll make everything better. Just like the people you hear today. Well, we don't have to agree on everything. We all believe in Jesus, so it'll all be all right.